Hello, economics, and welcome to our next lesson. This is Unit 3, Lesson 5. This is Part 1 of Lesson 5. This is a long lesson, a fairly long lecture, so I've decided to divide it into two parts. Our overall theme, actually, over the next couple of lessons are tied together with the concept of market structure, which we're going to be talking about here in this one. Although this lesson is titled Monopoly, this sets up market structure, which is something that we will cover in the next two lessons, in lessons 6 and 7. To kind of get us understanding what we mean by a market structure and how monopoly or other market structures may impact price and supply of a product, let's turn our attention to a corporation from the early 2000s that we've already mentioned in our previous two lessons. We've made reference to it. And that corporation is Enron Corporation. The Enron Corporation was a major energy supplier that was caught in a web of scandals in the early 2000s. Enron, the seventh largest company in the United States at the time, supplied electricity and natural gas to its customers. The firm built and operated power plants and pipelines around the world and organized a market for buying and selling energy. The firm had few competitors, so the model of perfect competition that we talked about back in Unit 2 did not apply to Enron. Enron used its influence on the power industry in California to drive up electricity prices there. As you've learned, a decrease in supply results in an increase in price. Enron reduced the supply of electricity in California by closing power plants that served the state. By cutting supply, Enron caused the price of electricity to rise, and that increased its profits. An incident on the afternoon of January 16, 2001, illustrates Enron's strategy. An Enron employee was recorded on tape telling an operator of a 50-megawatt power plant, "We want you guys to get a little creative and come up with a reason to go down." The next day, the plant stopped supplying electricity, and 1 million customers in California were hit by blackouts. The cut in supply caused the price of electricity to surge. This created a handsome profit for Enron. Until these and other questionable practices were revealed, the company went bankrupt and its top officers went to prison. Our next three lessons consider how price and quantity are determined in markets that are not perfectly competitive. And we start with monopolies. Unit 2 discussed perfectly competitive markets in which many consumers and firms buy and sell goods. In a perfectly competitive market, no single buyer or seller can influence the price because each market participant is small relative to the market. In some ways, a perfectly competitive market is like a beach, with each grain of sand representing a firm. If you stood on the beach and one grain of sand shifted below you, it would make no difference to you, because it is such a small part of the beach. Likewise, the actions of one out of thousands of carrot sellers would have no significant influence on the market for carrots. If instead you stood on a large boulder, a shift of the boulder would have a dramatic effect on you. Similarly, in this lesson we will learn about firms that are large enough to influence an entire market with their actions. Our key idea: a monopoly is a market with just one firm that can earn continual profit if competitors have difficulty entering the market. And our learning objectives at the end of this lesson, and that's parts 1 and 2, you should be able to explain the concept of market structure. You should be able to describe the characteristics of a monopoly, and you should be able to explain the effects of price discrimination. An exploration of markets with differing amounts of competition is an exploration of market structure. Market structure is the term economists use to describe the nature of competition within a market. The spectrum of market structures is shown to the right. At the top, with the most firms, is perfect competition, the result of a great many firms supplying the same product. At the bottom is monopoly, the case of only one firm supplying a product that has no close substitutes. In between, we find the intermediate market structures of monopolistic competition and oligopoly. In every market that isn't perfectly competitive, there is imperfect competition. Imperfect competition arises when there is not enough competition among firms to prevent individual firms from raising their price above the equilibrium level determined by supply and demand. In this lesson, we will take a closer look at monopoly. Before we can classify the market structure for a good, we must identify the group of products that compete in the product market for that good. The product market for a good includes all of those products that consumers consider to be close substitutes. For example, the product market for headache medicine consists of Bayer aspirin, CVS aspirin, generic aspirin, Tylenol, Advil, Aleve, and many other brands of pain relievers. Some of the products in this market are identical. All brands of aspirin have the same active ingredient, while others are different. For most consumers, these products are close substitutes. When two goods are substitutes, a rise in the price of one of the goods causes consumers to switch to the other good. If the price of Tylenol rises, many consumers will shift to Aleve, so Aleve and Tylenol are in the same product market. Geography also affects the makeup of a product market. Suppose a town has both a movie theater and a community theater in the downtown area. If people consider the movies and plays at these theaters to be close substitutes, the movies and plays share the product market for local entertainment. On the other hand, even two movie theaters are not in the same product market if they are 100 miles apart. If a town has only one theater, and there isn't another theater around for miles, the one theater doesn't need to worry about losing customers to competitors. The movie theaters in other towns are not close substitutes for the local theater, so the product market for movies in that town would consist of the movies shown by that one theater. Did you get it? What is a product market? All right, go ahead and answer that question. And pause the video while you answer that question. Make sure you're able to do that. All right, and we're back. Let's continue. So what is a monopoly? Monopoly literally means one seller. A monopoly is a product market served by only one firm. The sole supplier to a monopoly market is called a monopolist. By avoiding the forces of competition, a monopolist can enjoy sustained profit. Consider that movie theater we just mentioned that has no competitors within a reasonable driving distance. As a monopolist, the theater can charge more for tickets than it could if there were a theater across the street competing for its customers. However, a monopolist must be careful in setting its price because as the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. If the movie theater tried to charge $50 per ticket, its customers might all stay home. Recall that in a perfectly competitive market, every unit of the good is the same. There are many firms. Firms can enter or exit the market easily, and consumers are aware of the prices charged at each firm. Monopoly is at the other end of the market structure continuum from perfect competition. Whereas firms in a perfectly competitive market have many competitors, a monopolist has none. This results in a difference in market power. It is market power that allows individual firms to influence the market price. Firms in a perfectly competitive market have no market power. They are price takers, meaning that they must take the market price as given. Imagine a town with many theaters showing the latest James Bond movie for the market price of $10 per ticket. If one theater tried to raise its price to $12, it would lose its customers to the competition. The table above compares the market structures of monopoly and perfect competition. Some monopolists can earn considerable profit, and competitors are attracted to profit like ants to a picnic. For a monopolist to maintain its market power, there must be a barrier to entry, which is something that prevents other firms from entering the market and competing for the monopolist's customers and profits. There are four general types of barriers to entry that allow a firm to maintain a monopoly: startup costs, exclusive access to a critical input, government protection, and unfair practices. These four sources of monopoly power are not mutually exclusive. Some firms gain and maintain monopoly status for more than one reason. Think about what it was like when your local cable TV service provider wanted to start offering service. It had to set up an extensive system of cables connecting homes with TV networks. Since then, as more homes have needed cable connections, that firm has been able to hook them up easily because it has cables running down every street. On the other hand, it would cost a fortune for a new competitor that hasn't laid any cables to set up a system and compete with the existing firm. As a consequence of the high startup cost of providing cable TV service, about 90% of towns have only one cable service provider. A cable service provider is an example of a monopolist in a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly is a market in which high startup costs make it prohibitively expensive for more than one firm to operate. By serving the whole market, a single firm can produce a large quantity and spread the high startup costs across many units of output. Most power plants operate in natural monopolies. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars to build a power plant. Once the plant is built, however, the marginal cost of producing additional excuse me. So once the plant is built, however, the marginal cost of producing additional electricity is very low. As the plant produces and sells more electricity, the high startup costs are spread across more kilowatt hours of output. Firms earn a profit if the price of their good or service exceeds the average cost of producing it. The average cost is simply the total cost divided by the quantity. For a power plant and other natural monopolies, the average cost falls dramatically as output grows and the large startup costs are divided among large quantities of output. Decreasing average cost gives the first power plant in a region an important advantage over other plants that might enter the market. By serving the whole market, the first plant has many customers and produces electricity at a lower cost per kilowatt hour than a new plant could. This cost advantage enables the first producer to charge less than potential competitors would need to charge to cover their costs, and thereby discourages competitors from entering the market. Economists have a special term for the source of this cost advantage. If, in the long run, an increase in output lowers a firm's average cost, the firm is experiencing economies of scale. Most firms enjoy economies of scale at low levels of output. Because startup costs are a large part of the total cost for a natural monopoly, increases in output cause average costs to decrease for relatively high levels of output as well. In other words, a natural monopoly is in the unique situation of experiencing economies of scale at every relevant output level. When the production process results in a natural monopoly, it is inefficient for more than one supplier to serve the market. That's because one monopolist can supply the whole market at a lower cost than two or more firms. We will see, however, that the desire to maximize profit gives monopolists an incentive to supply less than the efficient quantity of output. When a firm has exclusive access to a critical input, it creates a barrier to the entry of other firms. For example, The U.S. Steel Corporation is the world's largest producer of steel. Iron ore is a critical input into steel manufacturing, and U.S. Steel owns many iron ore mines. In the past, control over critical iron ore gave U.S. Steel a monopoly position in the market for steel. New firms could not enter the market unless they could find their own source of iron ore. Sometimes government protection enables a firm to become a monopoly. This can be achieved by granting a patent, copyright, or trademark that legally prohibits other firms from producing the same good. Patents reward inventors with the ability to make more profit than competition would allow. A patent prevents competitors from using the invention for 20 years unless the patent holder grants permission. For example, Thomas Alva Edison was awarded patent number 223898 for the electric light bulb in 1880, which gave his firm a monopoly in light bulb sales. He subsequently made many improvements to the light bulb and applied for patents for these improvements. Only after Edison's patents expired could competitors enter the market and eliminate the light bulb monopoly. The government can protect monopolies in other ways as well. For example, it can exempt firms from antitrust regulations that are designed to keep markets competitive. Congress has given Major League Baseball such an exemption by saying it can exclude new teams from entering the league. Normally, antitrust regulation would not permit an organization or group of organizations to prevent others from entering a market. If baseball did not have an antitrust exemption, large cities such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago would have many more teams than the one or two each has now. Japan does not permit its baseball league to have a monopoly. Tokyo, Japan's largest city, is home to 6 of the country's 12 professional baseball teams. There are also some firms that create barriers to entry using unfair practices that prevent others from competing. For example, several large retailers have been accused of lowering their prices below their own costs to drive competitors out of business. And the radio giant Clear Channel was once accused of trying to monopolize the concert industry by threatening to only play music by bands that signed up with its concert promotion company, Live Nation. In the 1990s, a popular web browser from Netscape helped fuel the firm's spectacular growth. Microsoft, the world's largest software supplier, soon introduced its own browser called Internet Explorer. Explorer was provided together with Microsoft's widely used Windows operating system at no extra cost. As a result, anyone with Windows, which was nearly everyone with a computer, had no need to buy a separate web browser. Netscape dwindled under the fierce competition from Microsoft, as we can see in our chart in our graph there. The U.S. Department of Justice alleged that Microsoft's practice was illegal. The Department of Justice argued that Microsoft used its dominant position in the computer software market to unfairly restrict competition from other web browsers like Netscape. In its defense, Microsoft argued that Internet Explorer represented a feature of its operating system and that it was not a separate product. The legal battle threatened not only to force Microsoft to stop bundling Explorer with Windows, but to break up the firm. The first judge to hear the case ruled that Microsoft was in fact a monopoly and recommended that the firm be split in two. One firm would sell Windows, and the other would sell the various other Microsoft products. After a long appeals process, however, Microsoft avoided severe punishment. It received a reduced penalty, but was not broken up and could still package programs, including Explorer, with its Windows operating system. Critics of the lawsuit argued that if the government prevents firms from developing market power, it will discourage firms from spending on research and innovation. Others argued that Microsoft was let off too lightly. Here is a summary of the 4 main sources of market power: natural monopoly, exclusive input, government protection, and unfair practices. So, did you get it? Name 4 ways in which a firm can gain a monopoly position. Go ahead and pause the video to formulate your answer now. All right, and we will continue. A monopoly can be undone by the introduction of competition. The primary threats to monopolists include the following. Number 1, technological change. Technological change enables new firms to produce goods that are close substitutes for a monopoly's product. This is happening in the market for cable TV, for example. Because satellite TV is a close substitute for cable TV, in communities where both are available, they must compete for the same customers. Number 2, the entry of international firms. Sometimes international firms enter into markets formerly monopolized or dominated by domestic firms. For example, the European company Airbus provides competition for the US airplane manufacturer Boeing, and Korean and Japanese steel manufacturers have weakened the monopoly position of US Steel. Lastly, the end of government protection. We noted earlier that patents expire after 20 years. Copyrights, which create a monopoly in the sale of an author's work, generally last for the life of the author plus 70 years. After that time, competitors can enter the market and sell the formerly protected good. Sometimes government protection ends due to a policy change. For example, in the 1970s, the U.S. government weakened regulations that limited competition in the trucking and airline industries, among others. All right, so did you get it? What are the 3 threats to a monopolist's position? All right, now that you've answered that last, did you get it? This is the end of part 1 of our Unit 3, Lesson 5 lecture video. There is no concept check to go with this part 1. The concept check will be over both part 1 and part 2. So you have a brief a reprieve from the concept check. All right, we will check in on our next one, part 2 of Unit 3, Lesson 5, next time. Have a great day.